Good afternoon, it's Matthew Holt. It is July the 1st, 2021, first day of the second half of 2021, and hopefully a better second half of the year than the first half's been so far. But I am back with the THCB Gang. So great show today. I have got a regular, occasional, and a new face, but a new face who is very well versed at THCB. So let me introduce who I've got on today, and then we'll go straight into it. From Nashville or Memphis? Nashville. I keep on remembering. Nashville, Tennessee is Marcus Whitney, venture capitalist, Jumpstart Nova, and entrepreneur. Usually from Boston, but these days hanging out in California, doing some caregiving, is Rosemarie Day from Day Health Strategies. And usually in New York, but today in Chicago, it's Christina Liu. Christina hasn't been on THCB Gang before, but runs THCB and is just about to head off to Yale Medical School. So with that, we're going to get everyone up on the screen and say, hi, everyone. How are we all doing? Everyone's having a great start to the summer. And the way we start this, as we always do, is to go around and say, what have you been looking at? What have you been seeing? What have you been doing? And I will start with you, Rosemarie.
All right. You hear me fine?
Yeah.
Thank you. So in my neck of the woods, a big announcement came that our state's Medicaid director, Dan Tsai, and an assistant secretary for health under Governor Charlie Baker has been tapped to work for Chiquita Brooks-LaSure at CMS. And so he will be one of her key deputies and overseeing Medicaid, a lot of Medicaid stuff, health equity, and a wide portfolio. But those were key things. And we are super excited in Massachusetts because he's done an incredible job with the governor's team around implementing an ACA waiver. ACOs. Through a Medicaid waiver, and that have very much been focused on reinventing aspects of the Medicaid program so that you're paying for value, not volume. You're dealing with social determinants of health, like all of the things. And our state's been immersed in that now for many years under his and the governor's leadership. So I think it's a really wonderful opportunity for the country to benefit from what he's learned on the ground in our state. So I don't want to just be totally parochial, but it is something of national significance, I think, and just a great win for the Biden administration. So happy to see that. And, every now and then I hope there's going to be like a world where there's some bipartisanship. And I just love that he's coming from working for a very popular Republican governor and going to work for the Biden-Harris administration. So I think that's just something for those of us who like good government. It was a banner week, and he will be starting on July 6th.
We'll see if he can find a Republican in Washington, D.C. who's a senseless Charlie Baker, and that might be a struggle. All right. Marcus, what have you been looking at the last few weeks? It's been a while since you've been on the show, so what have you been up to? What have you been looking at?
Yeah. So, I continue to be in fund formation mode and will be kind of through the end of the year. So a lot of sort of, inside baseball, not that interesting, but fund formation is always a fun process. If you're in it and it's going pretty well, and this is going pretty well. In terms of what we're seeing out in the market, lots of deals getting done, here in Nashville over the last 2-3 weeks. Some of the bigger deals, LifePoint Health announced that it is going to acquire Kindred Healthcare based in Louisville. So that's a really, really big acquisition. LifePoint, came off the public market, merged in with the health system. When they came off, Apollo was the backer, and now they've picked up Kindred. So we're just seeing more and more consolidation in the health system side of the world. And then this morning it was announced that Amedisys, which is positioned as being Louisiana based, but their headquarters is here in Nashville, acquired Contessa Health, which was sort of the darling hospital at home company, Martin Ventures launched company. So that acquisition was announced this morning, and the whole hospital at home movement had huge tailwinds coming out of COVID-19, obviously, and we've been seeing more and more legislation that is friendly to home health in general, increasing the number of services that will be reimbursed and increasing the reimbursement rate year over year from CMS. So that's a pretty big, noteworthy story. And then, of course, you just confirmed for me that Olive just raised another round. It feels like every time I come on, Olive raises another round. So
I think about every week Olive raises another round.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say. I mean, it's really interesting. Really interesting. You talk about that. It's Contessa. Some people say that they sold for 250 million. Some people say that might be a bit cheap given the current market. But this sort of integration or collision between kind of standard old world healthcare organizations like the ones that come out of Nashville and the ones that are starting up doing at home care. There was Brad Smith, the former under the Trump administration, the former. Right. Head of medical innovation, has just started a rural kind of physician plus home care plus pharmacist, company. And you saw relatively recently Medically Home, which was also Contessa's competitors, although it's right. Basically have competitors, got a big investment from Mayo and Kaiser. So you see, that whole area is coming around. And the other thing that's happened, to go back to what Rosemarie said, we haven't got to Christina yet, but Rosemarie, is that, of course, a lot of this is moved by the fact that a lot of Medicare, and this is Medicare for long-term care and at-home care, has been kind of privatized. And you've got people like Anthem and others getting into that game. Whereas traditionally that part of the Medicaid system was kind of left in the traditional world, while the rest of Medicaid has been pretty much put into managed care, private HMOs over the last couple of decades. So it's really interesting how that's all starting to play out, and it's having its impact. All right, Christina, welcome to THCB Gang. Fantastic to see you here. Of course, we chat all the time. Tell us a bit about A, what you've been up to, and B, what you've been seeing.
Yeah, things are actually a little bit quiet on my end because I just finished my master's in health communication a couple of weeks ago, and kind of gearing up to, thank you, to move to New Haven to start medical school next month. So it's a bit of limbo right now, but I guess we're all pretty tired of hearing about COVID and things being virtual and everything, but it's very much coming up again for me now that I have graduation and my white coat ceremony, and all of these very strange little hybrid situations that are coming up for them. So we're in person for graduation, in person for white coats, but we don't get guests invited to them, and they're being live streamed and all these things, and the students are really upset, trying to write to the administration, all of these things. And especially for the master's program, which has been just this past year and completely virtual, people really feel like it's been the short end of the stick. And it's tough when there are these misconnections, when this is the only time that we'll ever get to see each other in person. It's very, very strange.
I agree. I mean, I looked at, it's some years ago for me, but definitely that last, and the way they do it in the UK is somewhat different, but the last couple of weeks of college, are like one of the greatest times of your life after you do exams. And I just, for the last couple of years, the graduates have just, this year did better than last year where they had nothing. But it's just been, I just looked at it and go tragic, say you're never going to get that back. And the people in the last year of high school and, all that stuff is being, I think, it's awful, and it's just something that you can't get back. And I, for my sort of pick for the week, I am genuinely quite scared about the Delta variant. We are basically on this track since the last couple of weeks. If you look around the world, right? California completely reopened. I know kind of Florida and Texas never actually closed, but California, where it was taken very seriously, now is totally reopened. It took, the first day it happened, I went into a Trader Joe's in San Francisco. It was the official day. So Gavin Newsom was on, a couple of the LA talk shows, well, the James Corden show and some others out of LA, say open up, now the West Coast is completely open. And I went to a Trader Joe's in San Francisco, and I was the only person not wearing a mask. And I went, hang on, I thought we were opened up and take the mask off. And and now you go to a grocery store here, and about most people are now not wearing a mask. And I'm very concerned that now Los Angeles World Health Organization and Los Angeles County both said that if you are even vaccinated indoors, you should start wearing a mask, because you can still spread it potentially, even if you don't get infected, get a bad reaction from it. And the Delta variant, in Australia, they've now closed down Sydney. because there were some people who passed in a shopping mall, didn't even get close contact. It was kind of outside, or at least well ventilated, and everything inside or outside. So the Delta variant is very serious. You're seeing, people in some studies in Israel that some of the people who were, admittedly it was more the kids than the adults, but some adults who were vaccinated, were catching the Delta variant. It seems to be working, it's a more aggressive and easier to catch if you've had been vaccinated. And I'm concerned that, you're looking at the places opening up again, as it pretty much, I think it would, as vaccinations moved up, that maybe we start heading in some real trouble. And it remains to be seen, how much, the variants seem to be getting worse and worse, right? It was kind of the original one, then the UK one, then the one in Brazil, and now this Delta one, which I think got fused out of India, but seem to be getting worse and worse. So I don't know, we've talked so much on THCB Gang about the implications of COVID for the system, COVID for society, COVID for really, for the medical system and for how the economy as a whole. And to some extent, we were kind of all breathing a sigh of relief, saying we're going back to normalcy. The healthcare system seems to have survived, although it had some very harrowing moments. The economy had some very harrowing moments, but in fact seemed to survive with the Biden administration, especially the second stimulus package. We seem to be doing, the economy is actually doing well. The stock market is going through the roof. I'm just concerned that, that this Delta variant could be a wild card, especially if, we don't really know how impactful the vaccines are going to be. But the last thing I'll say, and then we'll go to the more general chat and go back to this Medicaid issue, is my one moment of triumph is that the person who comes and cleans my house, I've been talking to her for a long time, partly via my au pair girl who can translate to Spanish because I can't speak Spanish, typical Brit speaking one language. Finally came and she told me that she had her vaccine, just got her vaccine this week. So I'm finally, the one burst I'm convinced to have a vaccine finally works. So one minor piece of personal triumph. All right, so we have a number of topics there to dive into. I do want to come back to Christina in a bit and talk about the medical school application process, because it's clearly obviously fresh in your mind and it's not something we talk about a lot here. And we don't actually have an MD we usually have an MD of one or two on the panel, but you're going to be a future MD, so that's as close as we get. But let's dive in a bit to this Medicaid issue. Rosemarie, I mean, there's a lot of blocking and tackling in Medicaid, particularly with some of the waivers that the Trump administration granted around work programs and others that have now been rolled back and I think Georgia was trying to do something strange, and Arkansas and what have you. And then, of course, we have the overall problem that we still have those 12 states who haven't expanded Medicaid. But with this new, the new Medicaid chief, whose name I've already forgotten that you mentioned earlier, coming from Massachusetts, what do you think the likely next steps are for, how the program evolves, given that, what is it, a third of Americans are now on it? And
80 million people, I think is the latest number.
Little under a third of Americans, some states more than a third, half of all births, I think, nationwide are now on it. Mm-hmm. So obviously, critically important program for some of the most vulnerable people. Where do you think we're going with Medicaid?
And his name is Dan Tsai, TSAI.
Thank you.
So, as everyone knows, there's stuff that the executive branch can do through executive orders and such, which of course the Trump administration, tried to drive that really hard. And so part of it is pulling back on those and then putting forward other executive orders. But the single biggest thing that needs to happen in the Medicaid program, and I will hammer on it every time I'm on this program, is, as you said, the 12 states that have not expanded Medicaid. And that is 12 states, primarily in the South. I do want to take a pause, though, and say it used to be more states. It was 14 as last year, but then ballot initiatives were successful, both in Oklahoma and Missouri. So today, my understanding is that the Oklahoma Medicaid Authority is starting to enroll people in the expansion. So as July 1st, so this is a banner day. Unfortunately, their neighbor in the Midwest, Missouri, the Republicans in the legislature are trying to block any funding that would support the Medicaid expansion, and therefore their expansion efforts appear to be on hold or stumbling. So even though that was the will of the people through the ballot process. So that is what because there are 4 million people uninsured. and it is mostly Black and brown folks. And their studies have come out to show that Medicaid expansion saves lives. They literally studied the expansion and non-expansion states, similar demographics, and showed that Medicaid expansion, if people had access to that healthcare, it saved lives. So what's really troubling is that a lot of Republicans still want to tie Medicaid expansion to like these work requirements. And it's like it's just back asswards basically, because if you don't have your health, you can't work. I mean, that's it. And so putting it the other way, that you have to work, and then maybe we'll give you some health care. It just absolutely, we have to stop having that mindset. And so the problem is, and Sarah Cliff from the New York Times wrote a great piece on that earlier this week, is that in DC, they're stumped because they have put more money on the table for those 12 states to expand Medicaid. And clearly that is not getting them to the table. And so what to do? And you cannot do that by executive order. Now, a bunch of senators and members of Congress are putting letters forward saying, well, let's create kind of a different piece of the Medicaid program for these states. Let's do something that's Medicaid-like that we could do from the federal level. But it's chartered as a joint federal state program. This is where you just keep running into Supreme Court issues, and the states and their attorneys general, they dig their heels in and then they go after it. But I think something bold does need to come out of DC, because all of this is tied up in, what we talk about on this program at other times, which is all the voting rights stuff. So it's the same exact states that are trying to take away the voting rights from the people who would benefit from the Medicaid expansion. And so folks in those states are stuck. So without some other kind of impetus, I thought put more money on the table. That's been done. And that's not going to change a bunch of those Republican legislatures. They're too busy making sure folks won't be able to vote. So, I'm really concerned about that. And that will address so many disparities in healthcare. It won't solve everything, but as I say, it's necessary, not sufficient, but it is table stakes. It is the single biggest thing we could do to improve our overall health in this country, would be to close that gap.
Yeah, and worth mentioning for people who haven't seen it, the article that you wrote a while back, looking at how that impacts particularly mothers, and this is around Mother's Day that you wrote the article.
I did, yeah.
Around mothers and newborns, and some of the both the racial disparities, but also just the income disparities around access to care, sort of pre and postnatal in those states.
That piece I wrote was a good news piece, in that all the states right now have an opportunity, thanks to the federal law, to expand coverage in the postpartum period, which will help also to save lives of moms and babies. And so that's a state option. And then that means there will be a bunch of states, probably those who've already expanded Medicaid, who will hurry up and take that option. So that's going to help even more. But this very basic level of not even having any coverage whatsoever is truly the most critical piece.
Yeah. No, so it seems to me that we've got this crazy situation where the ballots passed a couple of states. And I think, didn't this happen in Wyoming as well, or did they not? There were a couple of states where it passed by the ballot and then didn't actually sort of managed to get.
Like that happened in Maine, and the governor blocked it, but then they ended up voting out that governor, and there's a Democrat, and they have moved forward. So it's tough.
As you said, a lot of this depends on who the governor is, right? Because Virginia had the same situation, and North Carolina.
You can have a governor who's on board, but it's ultimately the Republicans in the legislature can block it, and that's what we saw time and time again with the ACA. When we were looking at setting up state-based exchanges, and the feds would be shipping money to the states, and some obscure committee would be like, nope, we're not going to take that federal funding because we don't want Obamacare in this state. And they had the power to block it. And it's incredible how important what's going on at the state legislative, which is an issue, state legislative stuff. Most people are like, yawn, they don't even know who their state rep is, but they have incredible power to block. And that's what's happening.
We won't go into what I think we should do with states, which is abolish them all. But that's
No, keep my
Abolish the
faith.
states, the Senate, the Electoral College, America might become a democracy. In my view.
Right.
Marcus, I wanted to come to you and talk about, I mean, I may be making a bit of a leap, but as you look across sort of healthcare business as a whole, and especially, the sort of the establishment based in Nashville, in Tennessee, I mean, are you seeing either, it seems to be a lot more interest in these different flavors of hospital home, the kind of stuff you were talking about. I don't know, are you feeling from like the National Healthcare Council or something like that, more of an effort from industry, the healthcare industry, to try and sort of push some of this stuff? I know that they're not always in tune with the Republican states. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, I would say no. But I think that, the combination of Trump deregulation, largely in an effort to try to increase competition, which, for political reasons, he didn't get a lot of credit for initiating. And some of this stuff was already sort of underway from the Obama administration, but he certainly did take it a step further. And then COVID-19 kind of blew the roof off of a lot of the red tape. I think there's a general acceptance that primary care is going to rise in prominence, that behavioral health is really important and valuable and going to be paid for, and that value-based care is increasingly gaining momentum, and there has to be an answer for that. So, I think the industry here has always trailed the policy. Always, from the inception of HCA, sort of trailing Lyndon B. Johnson and what he did when he started Medicare back, in '66. So this has just been the way that Nashville has generally operated. So not leading from that perspective, but very closely trailing, tracking, and then making the right investments or acquisitions at the right time to continue to grow the business asset.
So let me talk.
Can I jump in? Because if I really went off on the Medicaid expansion, but if I'm Dan Tsai and I'm huddling, like, what are we going to do? I clearly working more on the value-based care piece, because the only way we get away from fee for service and all that, it has to be driven by government, because to Marcus's point, private sector doesn't lead on that, but they can be fast followers and do some really creative stuff. And Dan gets that. So that's where I think he has some tremendous opportunity. I
completely agree. I had a call this morning with a C-level from a large publicly traded, healthcare services company, talking about a recently rolled out expanded value-based care initiative, and was like, okay, let's go, ready to go. What do you got? What's in the pipeline? Right. And so, yes, when the money shows up and the incentives are there, the innovation will follow. No question.
Yeah, I'm actually very interested about that point. And just to wrap this part up, if you look at the other, you're living in these two worlds, Marcus. Well, you're living in multiple parallel worlds, right? Because you have the Tottenham Hotspur thing, and then your local soccer team that you're an owner of, right? And then there's the Euros going on. So I'm getting all excited about England beating Germany and playing Ukraine on Saturday. The one connection I have left to my home country is supporting the soccer team and being disappointed as they go out of the World Cup and the Euros every 4 years. Maybe they'll get to the end this time. We'll see. But you're also in the world of Nashville healthcare establishment, but also that venture capital piece. And where I am, the sort of central world's venture capital, we're seeing, I mean, you mentioned all of this morning, and now the private equity guys are you're seeing extraordinary amounts of money going into all the areas you mentioned, right? Mental health. I mean, Oliver's raised up $900 million, whatever it is now, but Lyra has raised, I think, $600 million as a big mental health company. And you're seeing incredible numbers of behavioral health companies across the board, whether it's depression and anxiety, but also for substance abuse and PTSD, and also people raising huge amounts of money. Also, people putting a lot of money into psilocybin and ketamine and other attempts to can we get pharmacological help for PTSD and that kind of stuff. You see that level is growing, and then all the people who are building tools, which are going to go into these new types of care systems. Most of them are aimed at Medicare Advantage, because where most of the money is. So you've got people building tools for companies like Oak Street and Iora, which, since we all been on the phone, Iora got acquired by One Medical.
Yep.
But also, you know, you've got City Rock and others aiming at that, and Conhe Sano. I keep going here on Juan Mesa. Every time I get it, he's come on the show, I mispronounce their name. And Jess, when she's on, shouts at me. You know, who are aiming particularly at the Medicaid, you know, Medicaid group, Medicaid population. So it's not like the private sector is, you know, if you especially look on the funding side, is ignoring this, but it's, I think, as Rosemarie would say, it's a really big leap. And then if you have a problem where some of the states haven't expanded that, you know, there just isn't coverage. You can't give new programs who don't have enough coverage. So
yeah, so you know, you referred to me sort of having one foot in the venture world and another in the Nashville establishment. I think that the key differentiator, you know, is where you know, this new money coming in is not the establishment,
right?
You know what I mean? Like, so like, for example, I mean, I just was reading the Olive story, and the deal was led by Vista Equity. Okay, so Vista Equity typically invests in enterprise SaaS businesses, not healthcare IT businesses. Like, those are not the same thing. So right. I don't know the Vista portfolio sort of company for company, but I think this might be sort of the biggest or first investment they've made of this sort of scale into healthcare. And generally speaking, like, I remember, I think the most recent investment they had made was into Pipedrive, which is a CRM company, you know, a company that had been around for much longer than Olive. I mean, Olive's been around, it used to be called Crosschecks, but in this iteration, this has been a short, fast ascent through venture capital and now into the private equity ranks. You know, the more established money in healthcare still buys value. A lot of what I'm seeing is, and look, I know some of the people on the Olive team, I have tremendous respect for them, but if you look at the ascent of the valuation, it would be very difficult to say that the fundamentals are what is underlying it. There has to be a lot of opportunistic, you know, futurescaping going on, being priced into these valuations, right? And so generally speaking, you don't see that kind of valuation math coming from established players in healthcare, right? Okay, you don't see that. So I guess that's sort of my thing is, I don't fully understand it. You know, I look at a deal like the CD&R deal with, you know, Vera Health, and I'm like, okay, you know, sort of valued at around 400 million. Okay, that looks like a value buy, right? You know what I mean? Like, those numbers seem to be a little bit more tangible than 4 billion. Not betting against Olive to win, but I'm just saying what has happened is the typical markets that all this money was going after before have been consolidated and scaled into what are effectively now monopolies. You know, typical consumer tech, social networks, marketing and advertising technology, e-commerce, all this stuff has sort of gotten to a point where there's not as much opportunity. Healthcare is a new frontier where people think they can plunge a ton of capital and move markets. I think it's going to be interesting how it all actually plays out. Yeah,
I just to wrap on this part, I saw a couple of things that are worth noting. One is we've got an IPO which is heading out, a SPAC heading out somewhere, which is ShareCare. Similarly, you know, doing about 400 million-ish in revenue, is going to be valued around, going to go about 4 billion. And you had Doximity, which is a very rare digital health company that makes a profit, but a doctor network. You know, had an incredible IPO just last week, that went out at 4 billion on about 400 million revenue with about 50 million profit. It's a very profitable company, which you know, got bid up to be worth 10 billion at one point. You know, so you're seeing the sort of valuations of the stock market, which it reflects back on the stuff that we were talking about before, Rosemarie, the Biden package, all the, you know, and the money that's been flooded in the system under COVID, but also this idea that the rest, you know, whether it's a bubble or whether it's real, that this technology can change the rest of the system the way that Amazon's changed retail and, you know, Google's changed everything. You know, and it definitely remains to be seen whether that happens in healthcare or not. But that's what's driving this. And I remember I saw an interview with someone from Bessemer, which is one of the VCs, which is like right behind the sort of cloud drives ring. They're a bunch of everything called the Bessemer Cloud Index, which, you know, if you'd put in $10 in 2011. All these public companies they track it, be worth a gazillion billion because it's all the different the infrastructure companies behind the enterprise stuff which have done so well in the last decade. And when asked, which companies and which sectors, it was digital health, and then something else. So and it wasn't from their digital health guy, Steve Krause. It was from one of the other partners who didn't know talking about that. So there's this rash of expectations, and yes, it's a $4 trillion industry, but we're going to have to find out, whether this is a bubble that pops, or whether it's a bubble which the actual companies grow into that. What do you call it? Futurescaping.
Well, I just want to say one final point, and then let's circulate, because there's actually something I wanted to talk about that I feel like has been underlying a lot of the early conversation. But just to kind of wrap up this particular point, I just get the sense that they're not fully tracking one of, I think, the bigger trends that is underway, which is, what are the established leaders in healthcare today doing, right? Okay, so let's look at a United Health Group, not United Healthcare, but United Health Group, right? They are covering sort of the three primary aspects of healthcare under one roof, and at significant scale. They've got the payer piece, obviously. They've added health services with Optum, but also this huge data component, right? And they're being very, very aggressive. HCA just announced a partnership with Google Cloud. I mean, the incumbents are not going to just sit on their hands, and they have incredible staying power. I don't think everyone understands how difficult it is to unseat these companies. So I look at this stuff and I just sort of say, from a 5 to 10 year window, I'm just generally speaking not betting against the incumbents in healthcare right now. And I don't know that it's going to necessarily come in the form of a correction, but some of this stuff does feel very, very frothy to me, and not based in a reality around what drives the healthcare economy in this country, right? What actually drives the economy, which is a lot of what we're talking about.
And I add just one last thing, which is that those incumbents you talk about, so you have the HCAs of the world who obviously have a for-profit and can raise tremendous amounts of cash. They have to.
Yeah.
The non-profit incumbents who are even bigger, right? Who are 80% of the market on the hospital side, and sort of a good 60%, well, 50-60% of the market on the if you've got the blues on the non-profit side and the plan side, are sitting on incredible amounts of cash.
Unbelievable amounts of cash.
Is sitting on $25 billion, up
unbelievable amoants of cash.
Nonprofit.
I mean, I call them hedge funds that are running healthcare services business on the side, because they're making more money on their Wall Street trading than they are. But they haven't. And the joke is, because of CARES Act, they got money to cover the losses if they had any losses during that. They haven't touched that stuff during COVID. Everyone's complaining about hospitals about to lose their shirts. They didn't touch their their reserves have gone up, and at some point, it comes down to everyone thinking about, well, everyone shows the example of Amazon coming in, and like Sears and all these other retailers, JC Penney, so going out of business and having their clocks cleaned. It's not going to be quite that simple. The way I think people look at that chart and look at those stock charts, you see Amazon 10 years ago when it was worth X, and now it's worth a gazillion times X, and it's not going to be that simple now.
No. Amazon would have to make the equivalent investment that they made in their e-commerce infrastructure into healthcare in order to have that kind of result. The equivalent. They might, but that would be the requisite ante up. It can't be, hey, we bought PillPack and we've got a couple of PBM licenses and we're good to go. No, it's got to, you gotta go all in to really disrupt this ecosystem.
All right. So let's flip this and let's talk about the experience of people actually, in the system and heading into the system. So Christina, I want to check you. So could you just run us through? I mean, most people on this watching this, and I'm sure Marcus and Rosemarie and myself, I would talk for Rosemary's younger days and what she was up to when she was in college. But Marcus is a techie guy and I was a useless physical scientist. So what do you have to do to get into medical school these days? Because I know applications were way up during the pandemic and people Right, so and you I know have been hanging out for a couple of years doing post your graduation from undergrad at Northwestern while you've been doing your master's degree and working in a startup. So what was the experience like for you to apply to all these different systems, especially if you can't go there, I guess?
Yeah, you have to do a lot. I mean, it's the entire like pre-med 4 years of undergrad is all of the bio, the orgo, like the classes you have to take. You have to do research, you have to shadow, you have to volunteer. You need to find some time within all of that to be someone interesting and stand out on your applications. I don't know how that's supposed to happen. Maybe you get a job at THCB to do that.
That's clearly the main way. Or you could play like concert violin, as my former colleague Sophie Park did as well. Somehow. And then she got into Harvard and turned them down, but that's a separate story.
Okay.
You're not turning down. Let me check. You're not turning down Yale. Is this clear?
No.
All right. Tell us a bit about the process, right? I mean, how many medical schools do you have to apply to? What does it cost? What do you have to do for each one? How long does it take? What's the demands on a wannabe doctor?
A lot. I applied to 25 schools, which is a lot, I guess. I think that at Northwestern, at least, that's like fairly average, like 20, 25. But it varies from fewer, like 10 or less, to 40 or more. So yeah, it's a lot. Each school you send like a primary application to, which is your personal statement, like why medicine, all of your extracurriculars, all of your recommendation letters, like the standard stuff, kind of all the common app for undergrad. But then once you send that in, all of the med schools that you apply to will send you their school-specific supplemental essays as your secondary application. So those come in just kind of like sporadically throughout the summer, and you have until December theoretically to turn them in. But they want them back within 2 weeks, is the recommendation. So you're sitting there with like 100 essays to write in 2 weeks.
And so that first set of applications is common, right? You do one and copy and paste, or just do what one medical did. You put them all in the BCC line and just send it off. Okay, but the second set, I mean, how much different is you're doing? How many of them came back and said, yeah, send us the second one? Did they all come back and say that, or did only some of them?
I think before it used to be more of like a filtering mechanism, but now they just want you to pay that extra fee. So almost everybody sends you.
How much does it cost? I mean, to send the fee in?
The secondaries are like $100 on average.
Oh, so that's real money. You're asking a student to pay $2,500 in your case. That's wow.
Yeah, it's a lot.
I'm surprised you didn't ask for a pay rise, but go on.
Yeah, no. I lost my train of thought, but yes.
Well, I was asking how much it costs, but so now how different is each one? I mean, how much time are they asking for you to, you say as a write an essay? That takes a long time.
1 to 7 essays per school. So yeah, average like 3 to 5. So it's a lot. They're all quite different. There are some like pretty standard question types, like tell me about a challenge that you went through, or like talk about diversity in your, like, what will you bring to this med school, and all of those kinds of things. Like, where do you see your career going in 5 to 10 years? So there are a lot of like standard answers that you can kind of give, but they all phrase the questions very differently. The word counts are different. So it is a new essay for all of them. And some schools just have very different questions that they ask. Like one of the schools I applied to asked me to write a 2,000 word autobiography, I think. So that was, just had to do that. And this year it was, how has COVID affected you? Or like, how has COVID changed the way that you see medicine? And are you prepared for emergencies like this? Like there were a lot of COVID questions that were new for this year too.
Wow. So, I mean, could you approximate how much time you spent on this process? I mean, if you're an average, you would guess.
My whole
want to think.
It took me a year's worth of time. Probably.
Seems like an entire class, like at least one equivalent of a class or more.
More than that.
Yeah.
An entire semester of college is how, just like a whole year of college. That's what it feels like.
Wow. So, I mean, is there any movement anywhere amongst medical schools to try to standardize this stuff? Because I mean that's just okay, that they don't care because they're paying you to do it and they want to be the best. But I mean, I don't know if they're trying to filter you out of that point, but
I don't know.
they must.
We're paying them to do it.
Well, that's what I mean. But yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't heard of anything. I hope that they do, because I think the barrier to entry is just way too high.
Yeah.
Because I don't know how you're supposed to like work and make enough money to cover these costs while also maintaining your sanity. It's not good to have med students burnt out before they even start. So I don't know what the point is really.
No, I mean, it sounds extraordinary to me. I mean, among other things, right, is that there's obviously different pressures on different people. And I know you were working at a startup. You're obviously working at THCB as well on the side and doing other stuff. I mean, that's just a tremendous amount of effort they're pushing on you. And if every medical school says it's got to be different, rather than doing a sort of standardized piece, which my understanding is residency is a bit more of a standardized process for applications, but then they make you fly around and do interviews, and it's equally, the fact that we're burning, as you said, we're burning out medical students before they get to medical school, and then medical school itself is tough, and then obviously residency is tough, and then we're burning out professionals while they're doing their job. You'd think that somebody somewhere would want to do something about this. On the other hand, I guess you only go through it once, so there's no real incentive for you for it to be fixed for the next generation. We're making another bunch of people suffer later. But
well, if I may, I've been attending a lot of health equity symposia and conferences, and a big theme is the pipeline issue in terms of, so I talk a lot about access to care, meaning like, do you even have coverage? But once you do of some sort and get in the door, then how are you treated? And we know from COVID and all the phenomenal health disparities have a lot to do with who are the medical professionals, whether intentional or not. And I would say mostly not intentional, because of implicit bias, et cetera. But the point is that we need a medical profession that mirrors more of the population being served. And medical school, when you talk about those barriers to entry, in this very real way, it's like, okay, how the heck are you supposed to do that if you're coming from a background that has not built wealth? So you look at spending $2,500 just to apply, and how are you supposed to do the part-time job that would help you fund the application? I mean, just that alone is a pretty significant barrier, I would think, along with everything else.
Yeah, I mean, there's been so much written, obviously, about sort of inequities and really how we have parallel healthcare systems and based on geography, right? And Jeff Gosman was not on today, but has talked a lot about, was on NPR, the PBS program about Marcus. You're gonna have to help me. The community hospital in not in Memphis, not called Garden. Is that right? I'm blanking on it, but anyway, there was a PBS show about this, and Jeff Gosman was on it, and in the end, he said the sensible thing, which is that you can say what you like about HCA, being a for-profit company and these poor community health, these poor hospitals in the inner cities and the rest of it. But this is based on geography. It's where people live. It's where, it's how society is currently divided up and, has essentially resegregated around property values based on obviously income and race. And, we're seeing that. We're seeing that every day, and then come up in the news headlines. And I think this is just another, access to education, which is what leads into access to medical school, is just a crisis we haven't thought about. One minor thing, just to go back to the Biden stuff, is that in the last couple of weeks they bifurcated the sort of roads and bridges infrastructure they can get the Republicans to agree on, and the other stuff. And in the other stuff is the caregiving part, which I think is a big part of, we've talked in this show before about getting women back into the workforce. Can you fund, and that obviously would be a big part. That would probably go through Medicaid or something similar in terms of funding for helping people manage the caregiving of sick people at home, and allow, hopefully some sort of release of predominantly women into the workforce. And I assume, by the way, a lot of potentially, women to get back into higher education, and perhaps, we do need more women and more minorities. Well, not necessarily more women, we've got a lot of women going to medical school, but certainly, as you mentioned, Rosemarie, a different, diverse set of people going to medical school and going to healthcare. So, you got to hope that comes through. But it's going to
the
be
part
tough.
that gets labeled as socialism, unfortunately.
Well, I mean, you're right, but I mean, as Jeff has said on this show many times, infrastructure now is not what infrastructure was in the 1920s or 1950s, right? I mean, infrastructure is a different thing. And I don't even know if broadband made it into that. But if you're going to talk about roads and bridges, you're not going to talk about broadband in inner cities and rural areas, and cell phone coverage and 5G and all the rest of it, let alone how people actually live, services that will help people support in the workforce, daycare, childcare, obviously care, support for caregiving. We know there's a massive economy that's stuck there. And that I have this every day. I literally was on the phone with somebody yesterday who went through an awful health episode of cancer care. Cancer care is now building a caregiving startup in order primarily to look after her parents and who are now about to who are going to old age, but was thinking about how do you help somebody who's going through all these healthcare issues manage their life. And we know it's a tremendous suck on people. In fact, my friend Alex Drain, has built this company called Archangels all around this, and is trying to, talk about this on a national stage, and it's done a lot to advance the conversation. But we're nowhere close, on all the things we have to do. And yes, a lot of these things happen by definition. If you have money and you live in a good area and you have good education and a good job and income, you can probably handle stuff better than if you can't. It's just, and we haven't. And yes, Rosemary, they call it socialism, but I mean, it impacts, the joke is, it impacts everybody across the country in different regions. And a lot of the people who are voting Republican are impacted by this as well. All right, rant over for that part. So Christina, I want to talk to you a bit more about, you just also, as well as going through this, you just did the communications degree in the Masters in Healthcare. Talk us a little bit about why do you do that program, other than that you wanted to get a job at THCB and helped you? I don't know. I didn't do the interview, so I don't know what Zoya said to you when you were hired. But why did you do that, and what did you get out of that program, and how do you think that will help you going forward in medical school and later on as a doctor?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that we can all agree that there are massive gaps and fractures in communication at every level in healthcare. And that's kind of part of what drove me to pursue this program and what I was able to look at throughout the degree. I was an English major in undergrad, and I love literature, I love storytelling, and there's always been this part of me that I wanted to bring into medicine in my future career, hence working at THCB and all these things that I'm pursuing. So when I heard about this program at Northwestern, it really synced up with all of those passions, because I didn't really know where that was going to fit in, but health comm definitely fits the bill. So I don't know, I think that there are a lot of the skills that I learned in this program were around how do you look at a communication problem, break it down, and look for ways to design solutions to them. To say, okay, like, do we have a navigation problem? Is this a dramatization problem? What's going on here? Like, how do we fight stigma? What kind of messaging campaigns could work? Should we use a humor appeal, a fear appeal? Like, what is going on, and how do we impact all of these different areas that communication can occur in and can break down in? So yeah, just looking at how do we do that? How do we implement solutions? How do we test solutions? And make sure that we're on the right track in that sense. And I think just like having that mindset going into medicine will be helpful.
So let me put you on the spot here. We have a massive communications issue right now, right, about vaccination of people who are unwilling to be vaccinated. What are we doing? What are we doing wrong? And what should we want when we make Christina Liu the czar of vaccine communication? What should we be doing?
I mean, at this point, it's like, how do we make it so easy for people to get vaccinated that they don't have to lift a finger? Because I think that there are a lot, like the people who have wanted to get vaccinated have done it, right? And we have all these people who are like, oh, like maybe I would do it, but they wouldn't, take time out of their day. So how do we actually like make it so easy and give like fix that kind of navigation problem and like help them access it in a way that makes sense. I think the other part is just is education, it's framing, it's like figuring out where and why these conversations are happening and why people are hesitating. How do we facilitate better information gathering and like more human conversations about that actually address it.
Doing that. What about the concept of, community leaders and sports stars and whatever, and getting those NFL players who are to change, who are anti-vaxxing to change their mind? I mean, have we done enough? I saw Barack Obama talking to Charles Barkley and Shaq, about it, but I'm not sure I've seen as much. I mean, I've seen some good stuff in California about it. You can go get it done. I'm not sure I've seen the kind of the meme / Instagram / celebrity-led vaccination efforts that I like to see. I don't know if is that something that you think I might just missing it? Are we getting enough of that? Or do you think there should be more of that?
I haven't seen much of it either. I feel like it is out there though. Do you guys know Marcus, Rosemarie? I'm not on TikTok, so I'm not going to see it, promise.
I mean, it seems to we have a couple of areas, right? We if you look at the numbers, African American and Hispanic vaccinations picking up, but it's below where white is, and clearly evangelical Christian, sort of far right Republican, anti-science stuff. If you just look at the data, Charles Gabby, who's a great Twitter follower, has done these remarkable charts where looking at counties in California, elsewhere, where they vote for, the percentage of the vote for Biden and the percentage of vaccination is way up here, and the vote for Trump and the percentage of vaccination is way down here, and the line is just, it's staggering. And how this became this, political issue when it's the thing which,
so a lot of people who aren't getting vaccinated are actually like the white evangelicals. So they're the ones who are in the whole Trump.
They make it tough to reach, but I mean,
there's that whole group, and I can't really speak as much to that, but I am on the board of a hospital that is in a predominantly Hispanic area that has done an amazing job of community outreach. We're still not where we need to be, but they were the hotspot. This is in Lawrence, Massachusetts. And so we are learning as we go, and it's a very community-based approach. And so, I mean, I'm a fan of there being sports stars and, entertainment stars giving a message. That's fine, but it's not sufficient. People need to know that their pastor or their community leader, somebody who really is more like at their level in life. So you can't discount what somebody's saying because, oh, well, they're just incredibly rich and they fly around in their own plane or whatever. It's like, oh, you know my reality. And if it was safe for you, or like you were hesitant and you did it, that is the most powerful messaging. It's also, a one by one. It's not like some big massive campaign. It's very grassroots in nature. And so it takes a lot of human capital to make it happen.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing is going to be, so the way we get everyone else vaccinated. Now, don't forget, most vaccines are done to young people, kids, and you have the scheduled vaccinations, and obviously there's been the anti-vax movement for years around that issue. But the interesting thing is going to be is what happens when we get the approvals for the childhood vaccines, and then people start demanding, do school districts start demanding them? I've noticed that hospitals, many hospitals across the country are now, starting with Houston Methodist, which fired a bunch of people or laid them off or whatever. 100 or so didn't want to get vaccinated who were working there, were told, no, you've got to get it done. And now we're seeing, several hospitals in Boston, I think Mass General and some others all came on and said, yes, our staff are all going to have to get it, even though it's not fully approved yet. To me, the question is schools. If you can vaccinate a 6-year-old or whatever the next level of approval, and the school districts say, yeah, you've got to get it done, that's going to be where we're going to really see it. Because I know there's been some hesitancy around parents and teenagers, and there's this small movement, if you've seen it, of teenagers hiding it from their parents because their parents are anti-vaxxers, but they want to get it done because they want to go out. So there's been I mean, I don't know how big that is, but there's definitely some articles about that and interesting. And there's a bunch of stuff going on about, how much rights the parents have over their teens. And in some cases, the parents are divorced, the dad doesn't want it, the mum does want it. And they're having to lie to one or both. And there's a lot going on in there, but it's, but we have the same issues over obviously things like contraception and abortion and about mental health and what access to the parents have after kids are 14. And, so that's going on in one group, but then you've got the younger kids. And from the data in Israel and elsewhere, it seems to me that, the unvaccinated children, even though they're not catching or getting the disease badly, are definitely vectors. They're spreading it, and we're going to have to get there. And I understand I know there are definitely Moderna and Pfizer are both running trials for kids that age soon. So my sense, we are going to have to, we're going to have to get there. I'm going to say, I remain terrified of this Delta virus. If it gets worse, and the fact it's we're starting to say it doesn't, the J&J vaccine, the AstraZeneca vaccine don't work against it. You need to get a booster with a second Pfizer or a second Moderna. And God knows if it ends up that the Pfizer and Moderna one aren't effective at, these sort of herd immunity level, we could be in this thing for a long time. And, it could be extreme. Go back to 1918 to 1920, they were in it for 2 to 3 years until it actually killed enough people that we got to genuine herd immunity. And that would be, as bad as the last 18 months have been, that's going to be much, much worse. So my fingers are crossed that we get the vaccination rate up and that we don't get too many more mutations and that everything works. But we'll have to rely on Christina going to some great research job in about 10 years' time to fix the rest of this for us. So Christina, I want to finish with you and then we'll go around. So I know it's really early days. You haven't even got there yet. What are you looking forward to in med school? What specialties, and what do you think if you were to say, if we see you, we invite you back in 7 years' time and you've done residency, what do you, presuming you get that, presuming you get in that route, what kind of medicine do you want to do? What kind of thing do you want to be doing?
Good question. I'm asking myself that every day now.
Presumably you wrote this in an essay like 25 different ways.
Yeah.
Some schools you had to pretend to be the super specialist. Some schools you want to be the venture capitalist, and some schools you had to be the primary care doc. I don't know.
This one, Christina. But yeah, no, I'm going into medical school with an open mind and kind of going to see what I like. But oncology is on my mind. It's an area that I've done a lot of shadowing and research and other very cool experiences in. And I think it has a really good mix of interesting science and meaningful patient care and lots of communication and navigation, juicy stuff to work in from a quality improvement and patient care kind of perspective on a macro level. So thinking about that, but keeping an open mind.
Fabulous. The person I was talking to yesterday who's doing the patient navigation caregiving company had just the most brutal experience getting leukemia and being in hospital for weeks and weeks on end and having to deal with that and deal all the stuff around it. So there is both a need for better treatment, but also a massive need for better communication and better patient care, as well as patient treatment in oncology, of course, across cancer. And, it's an area where, by the way, the folks that I had a quick Clubhouse chat, I got to have a quick chat back and forth with the president of Moderna, who happened to be on a Clubhouse chat about the vaccine. But I said, my question there was, what happens next? You fix vaccines, you fix COVID, you fix SARS variants. And he said, this stuff is eventually, if we get it right, going to fix cancer. So maybe there's some real hope in the light at the end of the tunnel there.
I'll just pipe up. I still have a tremendous oncologist. And when I asked her how it was she went into this line of work, she said she didn't really like the sight of blood. Which I thought, you can get into med school and not be able to handle it. But she said, no, she was kind of only half joking though. And she said, but it was a calling. Like she said, you find your path. And she's like, this happened to be, I could walk with patients on this path. And she had that tremendous, like the level of smarts and the empathy combined in one package. I said, I would follow you anywhere, honestly.
That is so sweet. I love that.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we've got to the top of the hour. Really entertaining conversation. So good to hear about your path towards medical school, Christine. So great to hear from Rosemarie on Medicaid and Marcus and Marcus me ranting on the business of startups and whether we're going short or long when the dust clears, and who knows. So we're going to end the way we always end with, what are the three of you expecting for the rest of the next couple of weeks and perhaps the next bit of the summer as we start coming down here? So I'll start with you, Marcus. What are you looking out for?
Yeah, so I've already been to San Diego, New York City, and the DC area. And, all areas are a little bit different. And so continuing to watch the country open up, and how different states and different cities and different communities are evolving into a reopened America. Everything from masks to vaccinations to convening spaces. So I'm just interested in the societal aspects of that. I believe that generally speaking, all the colleges here in Nashville are letting full-blown graduations happen. So I just think from market to market, it's going to be interesting to watch what it means to reopen.
Rosemarie, what are you looking for?
Well, two things. I think on the vaccine rollout, we are working with a lot of community health centers with the playbook and such to get to the so-called hard to reach populations. And they've been in it, for the past 50 years with the on the ground serving the community. So that we have incredible infrastructure there, and they are now getting some of the funding they deserve to do this work. So I find that to be a sign of hope. And then right around the corner is the 4th of July. And I feel like this is a time when hopefully our country can celebrate the progress we have made. And for those of us we're all on a spectrum of like how much mask, not mask, whatever. But I think because it's summer and we can be outside, it would just be nice if we could all come together and celebrate and just, exhale for a bit and not worry about the variant, just celebrate and try to come together as a country and then buckle down, and do what we've got to do going forward.
Yeah, happy birthday, America. Christina, give you the last word.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a little worried about the 4th of July, actually. We'll see what happens, but Chicago has been very, very, very open. Yeah, but we have good weather, so hopefully that will keep things a little bit less or more crazy. But I don't know, just kind of, living, moving out, looking at how things are going to go from here on out.
Fantastic. Well, of course, my main interest is, it's happy birthday, America, my adopted nation. My main interest is what's happening back in the old continent. To see if we can get past Ukraine on Saturday and then ahead to the semi-finals and maybe win the Euros. We may be dreaming a bit, but as they say in the UK, football's coming home, or maybe not. We'll see. But that's my hope. We'll know a lot more in next week's THCB Gang. And with that, we are done for another show. I want to thank my guests. I've been really entertained to have on with me today Marcus Whitney from, come on little PowerPoint, you can come up and go full screen. There you go. Marcus Whitney, Jumpstart Nova from Nashville, Tennessee, the capital of healthcare in America, even though he's one of these dodgy tech venture capitalists now. Rosemarie Day from Day Health Strategies, usually in Boston, Massachusetts, but these days hanging out in California with me. And Christina Liu, future doctor. Good luck in medical school, Christina. Thanks for all the work you've been doing on THCB. Hope I can keep you around a little bit longer while you're in medical school. But with that, it's Matthew Holt saying, thank you very much for watching or listening if you're on the podcast. And THCB Gang will be back same time next week, 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern on July the 8th, Thursday. And we'll see you then.
Bye.